How can a river flow through one of the hottest deserts on Earth without ever drying up? While everything around it struggles to survive, one river has defied nature for thousands of years. The answer is far more incredible than most people realize. The Sahara Desert is one of the harshest places on our planet. Summer temperatures can climb well above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall is almost non-existent in many areas. Some places can go years without receiving a single drop of rain. In an environment like this, rivers should disappear. Lakes should evaporate. Life should be nearly impossible. But then, there is the Nile. Stretching for more than 4,000 miles, the Nile cuts through some of the driest landscapes on Earth. Along its banks, cities flourish, crops grow. Millions of people depend on its water every single day. So why doesn't it dry up? At first glance, it seems almost impossible. Most people assume the river survives because it flows through the desert. But that isn't the real reason. In fact, the desert contributes almost nothing to keeping the Nile alive. The secret begins thousands of miles away from the endless sand, long before the river reaches Egypt, before it enters the Sahara, before it passes the ancient pyramids. It starts in places that couldn't look more different from the desert. Its journey begins in regions filled with rain, mountains, forests, and massive lakes. These distant landscapes are the true lifeline of the Nile. The river actually has two major branches. The first is called the White Nile. The second is the Blue Nile. Together, they create one of the most extraordinary river systems on Earth. The White Nile begins near Africa's Great Lakes region, where enormous freshwater lakes collect rainfall throughout the year. One of the most famous is Lake Victoria, the largest tropical lake in the world. Rain falls there regularly. The lake acts like a giant natural reservoir, slowly releasing water into the river system. Because the water supply is so steady, the White Nile continues flowing even during dry seasons. It provides a reliable foundation that keeps the river alive year-round. But that's only half of the story. The Blue Nile is even more dramatic. It begins in the Ethiopian highlands, where towering mountains rise thousands of feet above sea level. Every summer, seasonal monsoon rains soak these mountains. Huge amounts of water rush downhill into rivers that eventually feed the Blue Nile. During the rainy season, this branch swells dramatically. In fact, it provides most of the Nile's water during certain times of the year. For thousands of years, these seasonal floods transformed Egypt. As the river overflowed its banks, it spread nutrient-rich soil across the surrounding land. The floods turned dry ground into fertile farmland. Without them, ancient Egyptian civilization may never have existed. Every year, farmers waited for the rising water. It determined whether crops would succeed or fail. The river became more than a source of water. It became the heartbeat of an entire civilization. Ancient Egyptians even believed the Nile was a gift from the gods. They built temples beside it. They celebrated its annual floods. Their calendar revolved around its changing water levels. Everything depended on this remarkable river. But the real miracle wasn't happening in Egypt. It was happening hundreds and even thousands of miles upstream. While the Sahara remained scorching hot, rain continued falling in Central and Eastern Africa. The water collected in lakes. It rushed down mountains. It joined together into one enormous river that never stopped moving. By the time the Nile reached the desert, it was already carrying an incredible amount of water. The desert itself wasn't creating the river. It was simply receiving it. Think of it like a giant pipeline stretching across an entire continent. As long as fresh water keeps entering at the source, the river continues flowing far downstream. Even though the surrounding desert receives almost no rain, the Nile is constantly being replenished from regions with completely different climates. This is why the river survives where almost no other major river could. Its water doesn't come from the desert. It comes from places where rainfall is abundant. That simple fact changes everything. Still, surviving the desert isn't easy. The scorching sun causes enormous amounts of water to evaporate every single day. Hot, dry air pulls moisture from the river's surface. Yet despite these constant losses, the Nile keeps moving. Fresh water is continuously arriving from upstream faster than evaporation can remove it. It's an endless cycle that has lasted for thousands of years. But nature isn't the only force shaping the Nile anymore. Today, massive dams control much of the river's flow. The most famous is the Aswan High Dam in Egypt. It stores enormous amounts of water in Lake Nasser, one of the world's largest artificial lakes. This reservoir helps provide water throughout the year, reduces flooding, and generates electricity for millions of people. While the dam has brought many benefits, it has also changed the river forever. The natural floods that once nourished Egypt's farmland have largely disappeared. Farmers now rely on irrigation instead of seasonal flooding. The Nile is still alive, but its rhythm is no longer entirely controlled by nature, and that's only the beginning of its story. Because today, the greatest challenge facing the Nile isn't the desert at all. It's the growing demand from millions of people who all depend on the same river. Now, we'll uncover how one river supports entire nations, why countries are competing over its water, and whether the Nile could one day face a future unlike anything in its remarkable history. For thousands of years, the Nile has done something almost unbelievable. It has carried life across one of the driest places on Earth. But today, the greatest threat to the river isn't the desert. It's us. More than 300 million people depend on the Nile in some way. For many of them, it's the primary source of fresh water for drinking, farming, industry, and electricity. In Egypt, the dependence is even more dramatic. Nearly the entire population lives within a short distance of the Nile. Beyond its banks, the landscape quickly turns into vast desert. Without the river, much of the country would be nearly impossible to inhabit. From space, the contrast is striking. A narrow ribbon of green winds through endless shades of brown, showing exactly where the Nile brings life. Every farm, every village, and every major city along this corridor exists because the river continues to flow. But Egypt is only one part of the story. The Nile Basin stretches across 11 countries in northeastern Africa. These nations include Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, South Sudan, Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Egypt. Each country depends on the river differently. Some rely on it for agriculture. Others use it for transportation or fishing. Many depend on it for hydroelectric power. As populations continue to grow, the demand for water grows with them. That creates one difficult question. How do multiple nations fairly share one river? The answer has never been simple. For decades, Egypt received most of the Nile's water under agreements made during the 20th century. At that time, several upstream countries had little influence over how the river was managed, but Africa has changed dramatically since then. Populations have expanded, economies have developed. Countries upstream want greater access to the water flowing through their own territories. One nation has become especially important. Ethiopia. Remember the Blue Nile, the branch that delivers most of the river's water during the rainy season? It begins in Ethiopia's highlands. That means Ethiopia controls one of the Nile's most critical sources. In recent years, Ethiopia completed one of the largest hydroelectric projects in Africa, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The structure is enormous. Its reservoir can store an astonishing amount of water, and its turbines are designed to generate electricity for millions of people. For Ethiopia, the dam represents economic growth, energy independence, and a better future. But for countries farther downstream, especially Egypt and Sudan, The project raises serious concerns. Their biggest question is simple. Will enough water continue flowing downstream? The answer depends on many factors: how quickly the reservoir is filled, how much rain falls each year, how the dam is operated during droughts. These are incredibly complex issues that require constant cooperation between neighboring countries. Even during years with abundant rainfall, careful management is essential. Because the Nile isn't an unlimited resource, every gallon of water used upstream is water that cannot be used somewhere else. Climate change adds another layer of uncertainty. Scientists expect weather patterns across Africa to become less predictable in the coming decades. Some years may bring heavier rainfall, others could bring longer and more severe droughts. No one can predict exactly how these changes will affect the Nile over many decades. That uncertainty makes long-term planning even more important. Despite these challenges, the river continues to perform an extraordinary balancing act. Every second, water is moving from mountain rainstorms through lakes and tributaries across thousands of miles, finally reaching the Mediterranean Sea. Along the way, it supports forests, wetlands, wildlife, farms, cities, and entire economies. Its journey is one of the longest and most complex on Earth. The Nile also carries an incredible amount of sediment. For thousands of years, this fertile material built the Nile Delta, where the river spreads into multiple channels before entering the Mediterranean. The delta became one of the richest agricultural regions in the ancient world. Even today, millions of people live there because generations of sediment created fertile land where crops can thrive. Although modern dams now trap much of this sediment upstream, the delta remains one of the most productive regions in Egypt. The river has shaped far more than geography. It has shaped history itself. Ancient kingdoms rose because of it. Trade routes followed its course. Empires expanded along its banks. Some of humanity's greatest monuments were built only because the Nile made large-scale civilization possible in the middle of the desert. Even today, many of Egypt's most famous archaeological sites stand only a short distance from the river. The Nile connected communities thousands of years before modern highways or railroads ever existed. It served as a natural highway, carrying people, food, building materials, and ideas across great distances. Without it, history might have unfolded very differently. Yet despite everything humanity has accomplished, one fact remains remarkable. The Nile still depends on a natural cycle that begins far away from the desert. Rain falls on distant mountains. Lakes slowly release water. Tributaries merge. The current flows northward day after day, year after year. It is a system so vast that no single country controls it completely. Nature built it over millions of years. Humanity now depends on preserving it. But one mystery still remains. If the Nile has survived deserts, changing climates, and thousands of years of civilization, could anything ever cause this legendary river to disappear? Now we'll explore whether the Nile could actually stop flowing, what would happen if it did, and why its future may depend on decisions being made today. Could the Nile ever disappear? At first, the idea sounds impossible. After all, this river has flowed for thousands of years. It has survived changing climates, rising civilizations, powerful empires, and countless generations of people who depended on its water. But no river is truly permanent. Its future depends on one simple condition: the water must keep coming. As long as rain continues falling across Central Africa and the Ethiopian highlands, the Nile will continue its incredible journey northward. Those distant regions are the river's true engine. Without them, the Nile would slowly weaken. Without enough rainfall, lakes would shrink. Tributaries would carry less water. The river would become smaller as it crossed the desert. Fortunately, nature has built an amazingly resilient system. The White Nile draws from enormous lakes that store vast amounts of fresh water. These lakes act like giant natural reservoirs, helping the river continue flowing even when rainfall temporarily decreases. The Blue Nile responds differently. During the rainy season, powerful monsoon storms pour across Ethiopia's mountains, sending huge volumes of water downstream. Together, these two branches balance one another. One provides remarkable stability. The other delivers enormous seasonal surges. That partnership is one of the biggest reasons the Nile has survived for so long. Still, the future brings new challenges. Climate scientists continue studying how rising global temperatures may affect rainfall across Africa. Some computer models suggest heavier storms in certain regions. Others predict longer dry periods in different areas. Because Earth's climate is incredibly complex, no one can say with certainty exactly how these patterns will change over the coming decades. What scientists do agree on is that careful management of water resources will become increasingly important. Another growing challenge is population. Every year, millions more people depend on the Nile for drinking water, food production, transportation, and electricity. As cities expand, farms require more irrigation. Industries need additional water. Demand continues to rise while the amount of available freshwater remains limited. That makes every drop increasingly valuable. Modern technology is helping meet some of these challenges. Satellite monitoring allows scientists to measure rainfall, river flow, and reservoir levels with remarkable accuracy. Computer models help governments predict floods and droughts months in advance. Improved irrigation systems allow farmers to grow more food while using less water. These innovations cannot create new rivers, but they can help protect the one that already exists. The Nile also supports an extraordinary variety of wildlife. Its wetlands provide habitat for countless birds migrating between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its waters are home to hundreds of fish species. Along its banks live crocodiles, hippos, turtles, and countless other animals that have depended on the river for thousands of years. Protecting the Nile means protecting an entire ecosystem. Its importance extends far beyond human civilization. Then, there is its cultural legacy. Few rivers have influenced history as deeply as the Nile. It inspired myths, religions, engineering, mathematics, agriculture, and some of the world's greatest architectural achievements. The pyramids, temples, and monuments of ancient Egypt were all connected to this river in one way or another. It provided transportation for massive stone blocks. It fed the workers. It sustained entire cities. Without the Nile, one of history's greatest civilizations may never have existed. Even today, standing beside the river creates a powerful reminder that nature can shape the destiny of humanity. A single river transformed a barren desert into one of the most influential regions in human history. That alone is extraordinary. But perhaps the greatest lesson of the Nile is this. It reminds us that what we see isn't always the whole story. Looking at Egypt alone, the river seems almost magical, a ribbon of life surrounded by endless sand. It appears to ignore the rules of nature. In reality, it follows those rules perfectly. The Nile survives because it is connected to places most people never see. Its strength comes from distant lakes, mountain rainfall, and an enormous network of rivers working together across an entire continent. The desert isn't creating the miracle. The desert is simply witnessing it. That hidden connection explains why the Nile has continued flowing while nearly everything around it remains dry. It also reminds us how deeply connected our planet really is. A rainstorm in the Ethiopian highlands can eventually nourish crops hundreds of miles away in Sudan. Water falling near Lake Victoria can one day reach the Mediterranean Sea after traveling across thousands of miles of land. Everything is connected. And few places demonstrate that better than the Nile. So the next time you see a map of Africa, notice the thin blue line stretching through the Sahara. It isn't just another river. It's one of Earth's greatest natural wonders. A river that has carried life through the world's largest hot desert for thousands of years. Not because the desert is generous, but because the journey begins far beyond the sand.